Welcome back. So we're going to briefly touch on this stuff. We're not going to go too in depth. You just need to be aware of it. It really only comes into huge importance in the World War II aircraft. Although you can do some pretty fun stuff with this information, like work out arrival times, how long you're going to be in the air, how fast you should go. And yes, I'm a dork. I've done that before. And I've been within about 1 minute. So a lot of this stuff, yes, does 100% translate to DCS. So, air density. We touched previously on pressure and how the lower you are, the denser the air, the higher you are, the less dense the air. Now the pitot tube, we also talked about, that works out your altitude, also works out your airspeed. It might not be the same tube, it could be a different tube, depends on the aircraft. That doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that it still works the same way. It's still a pitot tube. So if we have a look in the middle, I've got this perfect drawing of A10s. One of them's indicated airspeed is 150, but its ground speed is 220 knots. The other aircraft that's in a lower altitude, its indicated airspeed is 200 knots, but its ground speed is 220 knots. It's still doing the same speed as the other A10, but the indicated airspeed is different. So we'll get into why that is. So ground speed, you need to be aware of what these actually mean. Ground speed is the speed of the aircraft over land. The same way we work it out for a car or a train. You leave from point A, you get to point B, you're doing 60 kilometers an hour. You know that if you do 60, you'll be there within an hour if it's 60 kilometers away. If it's 120, double time, that kind of thing. But I digress. It's the ground speed is just the basic point A, point B on the Earth. Indicated airspeed is the speed your instrument is telling you. Really, your pitot tube, it can't sense what's going on outside of anything bar the pressure coming in to the pitot tube. So it tells you how fast it thinks you're going, but it doesn't quite know how fast you're going depending on your altitude, because the air is denser lower. It'll give you a more accurate reading. The higher you go, the slower it thinks you're going to be going, because the pressure is actually getting reduced at those higher altitudes. So you just need to be aware that that is actually modeled. Really doesn't affect things in the modern aircraft, because you're given all this information in different instruments, different readouts, that kind of thing. But when you're in the World War II aircraft, you need to understand this if you want to do it as perfect as possible. Now, we won't go into it too much. Like I said, we're just touching on it. You can take your education further. I really just want to get you guys up in the air as fast as possible. So we've got this little pyramid here, and next to that we've got a ground speed of 190. We have a headwind of 10 knots. True airspeed says 200 knots, and indicated airspeed is 150 knots. Now the reason why it's saying this is because these are all compartmentalized. These are all different readouts that pilots can use to work out one thing, to work out another thing, and they're all important in their own way for certain reasons. So this is why you need to be aware that at least they exist. Not that we'll go too much into it. So the true airspeed says that we're doing 200 knots, although our ground speed is 190, and the indicated airspeed is 150. What's going on? So you're at a higher altitude. Your indicated airspeed is saying that you're doing 150 because there's not enough pressure going through the pitot tube. Your true airspeed is the speed through the air and the air over the wings. And I've put the slash there because it's your air over the wings, not just your speed through the air. But they're both kind of the same thing, and I'll explain why. And the reason being is we've got a headwind of 10 knots. Now, our true airspeed is 200 knots because we're actually doing 200 knots through the air. The air traveling over the wings is 200 knots, but in reality our ground speed is traveling 190 knots. But your indicated airspeed is completely off because of your altitude. So true airspeed is something different yet again. That is the actual speed through the air. Now the reason why this is important and is a thing, I mean, I can totally understand if you're new to this and you're looking at it and you're going, why? Why don't you just have ground speed, or just, work it out like a car? Well, this is one of the reasons why. Because you've got limitations on airframes and stuff like that or whatever, you need to know the speed that's going over the wings, your lift coefficients and that kind of stuff depend on how much lift you're generating, how fast you're going through the air. Say for instance, I live near a base, and my other half, sometimes we're in the car together, and sometimes we go over the landing part of the base, and sometimes the Globemaster's coming in, which is an absolute beast, and sometimes it hovers there and it scares the shit out of my other half, and she goes, "That's going to crash. Why isn't that, what's going on?" I've told her a few times. I think she understands now, but I've told her a few times, just because it's doing like visibly 10 knots, it doesn't mean that the aircraft's not traveling fast enough to generate lift. So on its instruments on the inside, it's probably saying it's doing something like 130 knots or 90 knots or whatever, but in reality you could watch this thing ever so slightly loiter and creep through the air, because it's not going anywhere. Its ground speed is different from its true airspeed. So that's why we have a different set of categories for different things, because they are important in their own way, and they all mean something different. Now, the calibrated airspeed is a correction for errors. It's not really a big deal in DCS, just basically because it is the ground speed. It's using the indicated airspeed, the true airspeed, all that kind of stuff, working it out mathematically just to come up with the ground speed. Really, that's all it is. But it is a calibrated airspeed using mathematics with the outputs from your other instruments to work out how fast you're going. I've said there it's not a big deal in DCS, but I mean, the end result is a big deal. I mean, it's up to you whether you want to work out how to do those calculations and work out your ground speed as a calculated airspeed. It's up to you. So there is a percentage of your altitude, so don't quote me on this, but it's something like 2% every 1,000 feet or something you go up. There's a 2% decrease in what your indicated airspeed is telling you you're doing. True airspeed you can work out from your headwind or tailwind, that kind of thing, and you can come up with a calculated airspeed, which is actually your ground speed, which is the most important thing when you're working out your arrival times and that kind of thing. And yes, I'm a dog. I've done that. I've gone, alright, blah blah blah, I'll work this out. And then you take off and land, and I think I was about one minute or whatever off. So this stuff does work. Now up on the top right again, there's a triangle. That triangle, D is for distance, S is for speed, T is for time. I didn't invent this. It was invented by most likely a Greek mathematician back in the dawn of time. Those guys were brilliant coming up with this stuff, and it's been around ever since because it works. So depending on what calculations you do with two of those, you can work out the third one. So you can work out how far you've traveled in a certain amount of time because of your speed and time, and you can work out how fast you're going because of the distance and time it's taken. You can work out how far you've gone because of your speed and time, that kind of thing. I'm not going to go too much into the maths, but it's there, it works, you can use it, it's important for piloting. As far as I'm aware, it works. It just works because it's worked for forever. It just does. So you can use it for things. The newer aircraft, this kind of stuff isn't hugely important because you've got outputs for all this stuff. And I don't think there's any GPS aircraft. I haven't used. I don't know whether I've used GPS or not in some of the aircraft, but most of it's all worked out from pitot tubes and that kind of stuff. But it will give you a time to arrive in the A10, so you don't really need to know it. It's really if you want to do cool stuff in the World War II aircraft, especially if you want to like set up intercept courses and know when, around about where you're going to catch up to them or that kind of thing. It's pretty cool. So yeah, that's just a brush on this stuff. You need to be aware of it because it's modeled, but you don't need to be 100% accurate with it, because of course you can hit the reset button if you make a mistake, unless you're playing multiplayer. But you know, you haven't lost your life or a multi-million-dollar aircraft. So the only other thing I'll touch on, because there's nowhere else that it fits in this, is I think compression lock is modeled in DCS, because from memory I've had it affect me. So when you're diving, if you're going too fast, the air over your true airspeed, or the air travelling over your wings, is too fast. Your control surfaces don't work and you end up nose diving. Now there's nowhere else in these topics where this is going to come up, or when we're talking about actually no, we will talk about it a little bit in the next episode when we talk about navigation. Now I'm not going to go too much into instrument drift or that kind of thing, because over time gyroscopes wind down, but as far as I'm aware, true north and magnetic north are modelled in DCS. Obviously they should be, that's your Billy Basics. However, I'm not sure whether magnetic drift, because in certain areas the magnetic forces are different in certain areas and you get a different reading. I'm not sure if that's modelled. Also instrument errors for that kind of thing, I'm not sure that that's modelled. So yeah, but we'll touch on that on the next one, because we're going to go into navigation now that we have some kind of a base understanding of altitudes and airspeeds and pressures and that kind of stuff. We can move on to how to get around, basically. After that, I'm not sure. We'll see where we go from there. But thanks for watching. Don't forget to like if this has helped you. See you next time.